Have you ever woken up in the middle of the night, groggy, disoriented, and wishing you could just go back to sleep? Well, you're not alone. But imagine this, in medieval times. Waking up in the middle of the night wasn't something that people dreaded. In fact, it was a regular part of their lives, and they did something completely surprising with that time. They didn't toss and turn or scroll through their phones. They actually got up and did something productive. Sounds strange, doesn't it? But what if I told you that this sleep pattern was not only common but actually normal? It was known as the 2-shift sleep cycle, and it held some serious secrets to understanding medieval life. Let's rewind back to the Middle Ages, a time when life was vastly different from today. No electricity, no streetlights, no smartphones, and certainly no Netflix to lull you into sleep at the end of a long day. People didn't live by the same clocks that we do now. In fact, most medieval villages didn't have clocks at all. So how did people know when to sleep, wake up, and carry on their lives? The answer lies in how they divided their night into 2 separate sleeping periods. For medieval people, this was the norm. Their day was governed by the rising and setting of the sun, and when darkness fell, so did the routine of sleep. The day didn't end with a single long stretch of sleep from dusk to dawn. Instead, they would sleep for a few hours, wake up in the middle of the night for an hour or so, and then go back to sleep again. This was known as segmented sleep, or biphasic sleep, and it was a lifestyle that many medieval people embraced. But what exactly did they do during that awake time in the middle of the night? That's where things get interesting. Instead of lying there counting sheep, they would engage in a variety of activities, some of which might surprise you. The first sleep would typically start shortly after nightfall. People would gather in their homes, which were likely cold and dimly lit by the faint glow of a candle or a fireplace. After a long day of hard work in the fields or trades, people were exhausted and ready to fall asleep. For most, the first sleep would last around 3 to 4 hours. You can imagine it, after a long day, slipping into bed, pulling a blanket close, and drifting off into a deep, restorative sleep. But this wasn't the same type of uninterrupted, deep sleep we experience today. There was a bit of a difference. They didn't just lay down and sleep straight through the night. Instead, after a few hours, the first sleep would naturally come to an end. This break in sleep wasn't viewed as abnormal, and people didn't rush to get back to sleep. It was simply part of the rhythm of life. In fact, it was actually a time to do some things that were impossible during the day. Imagine yourself in the medieval world, waking up in the middle of the night. You might be thinking, what could possibly be done at this time? Isn't the world asleep? But that wasn't the case. People saw this as an opportunity, an hour or so in the dead of night to catch up on things they couldn't do during the day. For some, this was a time of personal reflection or quiet prayer. Medieval people were deeply religious, and many would take the opportunity to pray or meditate in the stillness of the night. Churches and monasteries had specific prayers and rituals set at intervals during the day and night. These nocturnal prayers were known as the matins, or midnight office, and they were an integral part of the daily religious routine. The time between the first and second sleep was a perfect opportunity for people to engage in these spiritual practices. But prayer wasn't the only thing people did during this time. Many medieval individuals, especially in rural areas, tended to household chores. Maybe they'd tend to the fire, or even use the quiet hours to do some mending or weaving. For others, it might have been a time for some quiet conversation with family members. These weren't moments of anxiety or boredom, but rather quiet, productive times. And yes, this time might also have been used for socializing. As strange as it sounds, some people even used this middle of the night window for brief visits to their neighbors. Socializing wasn't confined to daylight hours. Some people took the opportunity to engage in deeper connections with family or friends. After this brief period of activity, medieval people would return to their beds for their second sleep. It was often a much deeper and longer sleep, lasting several more hours until dawn. By the time the sun began to rise, the medieval person would have had the full amount of rest they needed to begin their next day. This split sleep pattern may sound strange, but it had its advantages. For one, it was in tune with the body's natural sleep cycles. The first sleep helped restore energy, and the period of wakefulness in between allowed people to catch up on things like spiritual practices, light tasks, and quiet socializing. The second sleep allowed for deeper rest. It's fascinating to think that this kind of sleep pattern continued for centuries, but by the late 17th century, as artificial lighting became more accessible and people's lifestyles changed, the two-shift sleep pattern began to fade. The rise of industrialization, streetlights, and clocks shifted people's routines, and the idea of a straight-through sleep cycle became the norm. Now, you might be wondering, why did medieval people sleep in two shifts to begin with? It turns out, there are a few key reasons why this sleep pattern worked so well for them. One major reason lies in the way humans evolved to sleep. Before the invention of artificial lighting, humans were more in sync with the natural rhythms of the sun. In fact, studies suggest that humans may have always slept in two phases, with an awake period in the middle of the night. This segmented sleep pattern is deeply rooted in our biology. Another reason was the practicality of their environment. In medieval times, the night was long, and the only source of light came from fire, which was often not sufficient to keep people active throughout the entire night. People naturally adapted by taking a break in the middle of the night, using that time for things that didn't require light. Additionally, medieval people lived in tight, knit communities where work, chores, and prayers were spread throughout the day, leaving the nighttime to be a period of rest and personal activity. The middle of the night wakefulness didn't feel out of place. It was an integral part of their daily rhythm. So, what does this medieval practice of two-shift sleep mean for us today? In a world where we're constantly connected and our lives are controlled by artificial light, we often sleep in a much different way. Many people now struggle with the idea of sleeping in two phases because of the demands of modern work, technology, and lifestyle. But could there be something to learn from medieval sleep? Interestingly, modern sleep research has shown that segmented sleep might actually have benefits. Some experts argue that waking up in the middle of the night for a brief period could help with memory consolidation and creativity. In fact, a growing number of people today are experimenting with polyphasic sleep schedules, where they sleep in multiple phases throughout the day, similar to medieval times. Could the two-shift sleep pattern make a comeback in some form? The medieval practice of sleeping in two shifts offers a glimpse into how different life was in the past, and how human sleep cycles might not be as set in stone as we once thought. It reminds us that sleep isn't just about lying down and resting. It's about how we structure our days, connect with others, and find balance in our lives. So, the next time you wake up in the middle of the night, feeling a bit groggy, just remember, your ancestors probably did the same thing. And instead of seeing it as an interruption, you might just embrace it as an opportunity for quiet reflection, creativity, or even a little bit of productive activity. After all, medieval people found ways to make the most of their nights. And perhaps there's something we can learn from that.